Welcome on the Leaders Who Care. I'm really privileged today to bring you an incredible story of a very special guest, somebody that I've known for many years, Roy Hughes, who actually went from being homeless to running more than 10 billion euro operation and being the executive vice president for land operation and aviation Europe for DHL until recently. And he's part of some incredible corporate turnaround. For those of you who don't know, DHL was losing $2 billion before 2007. Today it makes more than $3 billion dollars profit. So thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And welcome on the Leaders Who Care. I've been really inspired about the story and the level of impact you were able to make. The region you've been operating for, it's almost 40,000 people, I understand.
Yeah, between 37.5 and 40,000 people, give or take.
And that includes over 1,000 pilots, 1,000, almost similar amount of technicians.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there was two airlines, about 1,200, 1,300 pilots, about 1,000 aviation mechanics, but then you had also 14,000 pickup and delivery routes. There was 23 regional hubs, 3 global hubs, and all of them combined, including customs and, quality and operations and everything else, made up the line of the 37.5 to 40,000 people.
Incredible. Going back to your beginning, you haven't even graduated. You don't have a formal degree, or you've not went to university. You're dyslexic, and I know you went to London with £500.
Correct.
And you thought that would be a good start, but actually found yourself that not even lasted for a week.
Correct.
Which ended up you being homeless for how long?
It was about 14, 15 months. And yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting journey for sure. Having worked since I was like 13, 14, grew up in an extremely poor area of North Wales. Normal story, father was a coal miner. At the time, Margaret Thatcher had closed all the pits, all the coal mines. With this, the industry in the area went down. So there was a very conscious decision of whether I stayed in the environment that was, at that point, economically almost destroyed locally, or I made a decision to kind of move. So at 17, yeah, I saved up £500 thinking I was probably the wealthiest guy in the world going down to London, and didn't realize at that young age the cost disparity between what the price was in North Wales compared to what you paid in London. So the result was, yeah, I was kind of like homeless for 13, 14 months, give or take.
Wow.
Some of it genuinely homeless, kind of on the streets, and other part of it where I saved up and I bought this old banger of a car, which was, I remembered it vividly, some Talbot Horizon. And then that became where I stayed until the point that I kind of then ended up renting a room. And then from there, of course, then I was off the street, so to speak.
Just talking about that moment when you were homeless, what a typical day looked like when you were on the streets?
A lot of walking, and a lot of kind of getting up early. For me, I've been very fortunate that I've always had a positive outlook on life. So even when I was homeless, I wasn't unhappy, so to speak. I would always see the good in things, the good in people. I used to talk to a lot of people, because I love human beings. I love people. And therefore I would talk to everybody and anybody. But there was a lot of walking, and there was a lot of I mean, at first when I went down to London, there was a lot of sightseeing, right? So I was in Covent Garden. You and I were in Covent Garden not so long ago, and I was explaining to you then the streets that I was walking back in the day.
Because
yeah,
yes,
if
that's
you
why you
remember
know them so well.
yeah.
Yes.
And if you remember, I was actually naming the streets to you, and I was going, I remember walking up this one, and I remember walking along Aldwych, past the Hilton, now the Waldorf, and then, of course, round the back of the Savoy along the Thames and everything else. So a lot of sightseeing, a lot of walking. But yeah, and of course, listen, it was great in the summer and it was dismal in the winter.
Definitely did your 10K a day.
Yeah, more than, because the more you kept walking, and you know, I had this £500, and the one thing I didn't do was I wasn't wasteful, in a sense of I kind of was, I think frugal would be the right
Yeah.
term, in a sense of I bought what I needed to buy. I didn't buy what I didn't need, because everything then would be a waste. And yeah, I kind of walked a lot, a lot.
Have you imagined back then a future like this today, or?
No, 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 nowhere near. I kind of, I had a different view on what the world would be. Certainly for me, you know, the first thing that I wanted to do was just get a stable job, and kind of get employment with a regular income. That, in essence, my whole drive at the time, even getting work, was just to take me almost one step further away from poverty, right? Because that's in essence what made me leave. I left school at 16, as you said, so I've got no formal education. Everything that I know, including the languages that I speak, is from a autodidact kind of element of self-learning. So yeah, for me, no, I didn't envisage anything like this at all. And it's been a hell of a ride. I mean, it's been a hell of a ride. I've had a lot of fun. I've met a lot of incredible people. Um, Honestly, if somebody would have said to me back then, you know, at 30, you'll be the operations director of the UK. You'll be on the board of one of the biggest companies in the world by the time you're kind of early 40s. And, you know, I've now sat as a board director in one sense or another, whether it was in a country or certainly within a region, for the best part of 25 years. Would I have ever read the tea leaves and saw that into the future? Nah, not a chance. No way. No way.
What is one moment that you remember from that time that still moves you today, that still drives you?
Well, the biggest element, if I go back and I have a look at a moment that really changed everything for me. And you know, people will actually look at elements and go, was this big, you know, aha moment? And you know, this was something that happened that I realized it was happening, but not really. And when I reflected back a couple of years later, it really stood out for me. And that was the hand up, the help that I was given. You know, when we've walked the streets of London, you know, I'm one of these guys who will sit next to a homeless person and talk to them, and you know, just try and say, hey, how are you? What's your story, etc. And part of that comes from yes, the fact that I was homeless when I was 17. But the other part of it is genuine interest in people, and genuine interest in trying to, even giving somebody some modest amount of money that will just buy them a dinner or something, but giving them a simple level of help. Because I do believe, and I really do believe, that you know, the smallest and simplest act of kindness can change someone's life. Now, for me, that happened because there was a guy at the time when I was working back then, when I got a job with TNT. And you know, the guy now lives in Canada, and he was the operations manager there, a guy called Tony Kelly. And he gave me my first significant and my second significant hand help up, which changed everything. He first of all gave me the job. The job gave me a good, and here's the thing, and this is the thing about when I'm talking about Tony. So when I worked within TNT, I kind of worked as an afternoon shift. I used to work on the loading bay, loading 40-foot trailers by hand with packages. And my shift used to start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was very conscious that I didn't have any education, in terms of I couldn't walk in and go, you know, guys, I've got this MBA or I've got this Bachelor of Science or whatever. So I kind of had a deal with Tony. I said to Tony, listen, I'm working from 12 till 10 every day. I said, what do you think? I said, you know my situation. At this point, I was sleeping in the car, so I didn't actually have a home, but
Yeah.
but at least I was dry. And I said to Tony, what if I come in at 7 a.m. every morning and I work from 7 till 2 for free? And by working 7 till 2, you put me in different areas of the operation or the business so I can learn how things work, what it's about.
Okay, that's interesting.
So for a good length of time, I was going in at 7 o'clock in the morning and I was working till 2 o'clock in the afternoon for nothing. And to be fair, Tony agreed to it. I mean, he's a great guy, to be fair, and he really, really is. He agreed to it. And in my mind at the time, I was thinking, do you know something? You know, leadership and management now is a lot more advanced than what it was back then. And to be fair to Tony, I think he was ahead of his time. He could have really just taken that advantage to use it as cheap labor, right? Where you hear stories of going, okay, I'll take you on, and then you go in and you're not actually learning anything, you're just making the tea. And I'm exaggerating for effect. But when I actually said this with Tony, he put me into different areas of what was happening within that facility so I could learn what was going on. And that was the second part of the first, in terms of the job and then the education and everything else. And the second part of the hand up, which was Tony again, he had moved at the time from TNT and then he was working for a company called Parcel Line. And, you know, there was a position that came up as the operations manager of a facility, which in essence was, you know, at that time it was the management graveyard within Parcel Line. And of course, Parcel Line now doesn't exist. It's now part of DPD. DPD bought Parcel Line many years ago. And he then recommended to somebody that I would be employed to go into that role as operations manager, even though I was kind of only 21 years old. And then that element was the first, getting the job itself. And the second element was putting me into that position where I probably learned very young in my leadership the importance of true people leadership. Not knowing all the answers, understanding how to get the best out of people and ask them the right questions to get to the answers.
Just one point for the audience here, because you've made two really interesting points. And one is you actually wanted to grow and you give your time, one of the most precious things you had. So giving, because success leaves clues. And if you by giving, you opens the door of receiving. So you started to receive.
Yeah.
But also coming from my background of leadership and talent advisory, almost 20 years of really experience across the world, I've noticed that people who have taken management roles in their 20s, they actually tend to do really well later on because they get exposed to many different situations, including success or failure early on, and they learn from it. So when I look for talents, I looked at, have they managed somebody or led a team in their 20s? So that's one of the key things just for the audience to mention, so because you brought in your story. So going from homeless to running a $10 billion or euro operation and almost 40,000 people region here, and such an incredible story. Was there one specific decision that you made that helped you get there?
Yeah, I think if it's a mixture of many decisions. There's two significant that I kind of, if I reflect back and I kind of look at, you know, what really made the difference. The first one is a true belief in what I call proper leadership of people, where you're honest with people, you're kind with people, you're respectful with people, and you know, you do things for others. One of the things that I've always said within my leadership journey is I would always love to talk with the cleaner. I love to talk to the guys on the forklift and make them feel more important than me.
But Roy, that's I heard a lot of leaders say that. Even the ones who don't actually do it. So the question is, and I can testify. I've seen you, because we're together. How you lower yourself, and you really were generally interested into the homeless person situation. So I know you've done it, and you do it. But there are a lot of leaders who, and to be honest, every leader should care. But a lot of leaders who don't do it. Is it because they don't want to do it, or they can't do it, or because
or a combination
of things? Yeah. Why can't everybody do that if this is turn out to be such a profound difference?
It's fascinating because it's back to this topic, and I love getting involved in the debate when people say, well, are true leaders born or are they made? And in reality, it's a mixture of both. It's not one or the other. It's got to be a mixture of both. People are born with a passion for stuff. People are born with energy. People are born with enthusiasm. I can't give you enthusiasm. I can't give you passion. You've either got to feel it or you don't. The intellectual stuff about making decisions, you've got to learn how to make decisions. You've got to learn how to take risk. You've got to balance stuff. But my piece with people is this. This is why I said genuine people leadership. Right, which is one of the two things that I said that kind of really had an impact. I truly love people. And I've hired, I've fired, I've promoted, and I try to do all of it with respect, kindness. Even if you're releasing people, you release them with kindness. You've just got to be a good human being. Now, yes, you'll have some leaders who find that difficult. You'll have some leaders who are just not comfortable in those positions. For me, I think true leadership is about people who are humble, people who are grounded, people who really understand the value of people. And there's truth in this, when I was re-engineering the landscape of DHL in Europe, with the hubs and the service centers and everything else. I remember sitting at a point and I was talking to some of my team thinking, well, we've now re-engineered everything. Right. Once you've re-engineered everything and you've gone back and you've fine-tuned it, the bigger element that makes the difference is not the machine, it's the people operating the machine. If you get the heart and soul of an organization right, they're not being funny. Motivated, emotionally engaged people will work longer, will work harder, and will produce better quality than unhappy people. So as leaders, what you've got to do is you've got to be able to sincerely, authentically, honestly, really have a vested interest in people. And, I love talking to people. I love talking to people at all levels. Because I also haven't forgotten where I've come from. Okay. Going through, growing up poor, being homeless and, doing all the stuff that I did. Fortunately, it's kept my feet firmly on the ground and I'm grateful for everything I've got. So when I say true leadership, it's the true people leadership that I'm referring to. And yes, there's this term we know within leadership where we say, if you can't do it, fake it till you make it. Okay. But the reality of it is that if you're faking it till you make it, people know you're faking it. So you can't fake it till you make it, because it's got to be, you've got to sincerely and authentically want the best for people.
So that's interesting, because there's both sides to this. Fake it till make it. I think I actually believe not faking it, telling the people that you don't have that, but you will try to make it until you acquire, until you become. So yeah. So maybe people can tolerate your mistakes while you're on the journey.
But that's different, because then the leader's got humility. Right. Okay. So when somebody's honest and open enough, I would be the first to walk into, one of the aviation meetings that I would go into. Yeah. And I would walk in and I would have enough confidence always, as I did in every session. If I didn't understand something, I'd be the first one to go, guys, listen, maybe I'm a bit thick in this area. So, and you are the intelligent guy. So please, can you explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old so I get the entire concept? And we'd all laugh about it and they'd explain everything. And you know what? You build build up respect by being humble and understanding that some people are maybe better qualified in other areas than you are. And your point of saying, if they go and say, listen, guys, I know this isn't my strong point, but I'm learning, you're showing some genuine, authentic humility. And people will warm to it because then, you know, you're
Yeah.
coming across as sincere. So that was the
Yeah.
first. Can I answer the second
Yeah,
question?
please.
The second one was when you said, you know, when you said the things that made a difference. The second piece that made a difference, and, you know, this is why I feel blessed that I grew up poor. I feel blessed that I was homeless. I feel blessed that I had to go through all the stuff that I did, because I didn't have any fear. When I was, and that doesn't mean that I was reckless. It's just, I didn't have any fear. I didn't have any fear of failure. When you've been homeless, right, there's not many places that you can go, right? So you lose this ability of fear. And certainly I did. So one of the other things that helped me get to where I was, that when certain jobs came up, that people were probably apprehensive or they were frightened of putting their hands up because there was a chance of failure,
Yep.
I put my hand up. Because I would always think that there was a solution to everything. And I still do today, right? I still do today. I remember managing the contingency for the European airspace closing back in April the 16th, 2010, when the volcano went off in Iceland and all the airspace in Europe closed. I managed that contingency back then for DHL, and that was another moment that basically propelled my career, if you like. And I remember the CEO calling me up and saying, "Hey, Hughesy, what are you going to do?" And my answer was, "I haven't got a clue." I said, "What do you mean you don't know?" I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Let me get the right people around the table. Let me see what ideas we've got." I said, "But let me tell you, the concept will be about keeping things moving." I said, "Other than this," I said, "I need to figure out." So this has never happened before. The only time it had ever happened before this was World War II, where the airspace actually closed. Right.
Yeah.
But it never commercially happened ever. And that was the other thing. I don't have fear of things going wrong because I believe that there is a solution. You get the right people around you, and I've always been blessed with having great people, right? These guys have probably made me even look better than a mediocre guy like me. Making me look really good was the great team that I had, because that was the real buzz. So, you know, when the integration, we did the business did an integration in Italy of 3 or 4 businesses between Euroexpress, Ascoli, MIT, etc. The integration failed completely. And they needed somebody to go to Italy and basically repair, recover, and get the business kind of operating again. So, of course, I put my hand up and I went to Italy for 4 years. And basically another one, you know, whether I did the same then when I went to Denmark and then I went up to the Nordic. It's the case of when those opportunities come up and you look at them and think, crimey, they're complex. You know, they're already on the agenda of the board, of the European board, as being an issue that needs to be fixed. And it's on the agenda every board meeting. And if you put your hand up and they know that you're there, and all of a sudden this topic comes off the board agenda because they're going, actually, the business is being re-engineered. It's now profitability is growing. Now we're getting better results in the employee opinion survey. The active leadership scores are going up. The quality is going up. All of a sudden, there's a degree of recognition with that people will go, you know, there's a bar talk thing that happens within business, as you know.
Yeah.
And when they stand at the bar and they go, do you know what, we need somebody to go and run this element within Europe. And that's how I ended up moving from the Nordic and taking my first significant European role as managing director of one of the divisions back then, was bar talk of people kind of going, well, you know, he'd run the operation in the UK. He went over, re-engineered some of the stuff in Spain. He then did a turnaround in Italy, then in Denmark, then in the Nordic. We think Hughesy can jump in. And that's where a lot of the recognition then becomes visible. But it's not having the fear to be able to have a difficult task where there will be failure. And I've certainly learned more from the times that I have failed than the times that I've succeeded. And leadership wise, when it succeeds, you give the credit to the team. When it fails, the accountability sits with me.
Fear is an interesting topic, and we'll definitely discuss more with you on that one. I would love to hear some of your thoughts. But one question, because for me, talent means a lot, and you spoke about the team, and that there wasn't your credit so much. But how did you attract exceptional team around you? What was the secret to your success?
Trust, openness, the fact that I have no problem with people speaking out. When I ask people for their opinion, I want their honest opinion. They can do so without fear. There's no fear of reprisal. There's no fear of me coming back and saying you're out of order because you said. People have to reserve the right to manage. People have to reserve the right to have an opinion, and people have to reserve the right to challenge you. I enjoyed being challenged by my team. And, you know, I would have some of them say, hey, Roy, you want to do this? I'm sorry, I don't agree and I think it's wrong. And I would go, great, tell me why it's wrong. Either prove me wrong or prove me right. And there was no emotion involved in them challenging me or me challenging them. I had a team. And here's the incredible thing. I said to my team for years, you know, the best team that I had at one point was when I was the ops director of the UK. Honestly, I felt like the conductor of an orchestra. I did almost nothing. I played not one single instrument. I never made a sound, yet it ran so well. And I tried to recreate that team for many years and failed, right? When I went into Europe, I tried to kind of, and then different, I was then having on my board people from Italy, people from Belgium, people from France, from Germany. I had guys there from Africa. I had guys there from all over the place. And I tried to recreate that same team. And, you know, I got to the point a couple of years ago where I had my team together for a board meeting in Vienna. And I remember vividly, and I sincerely meant this. I said, guys, you know, all of you, I've mentioned for years that I've been trying to recreate this team, perfect team, better than what I had when I was the ops director within the UK. And I had all the guys around the table, and I said, I've got to tell all of you, with the team I've now got around this table, for the first time in the best part of nearly 15, 16, 17 years, I now have the best team that I could have had, better than what I had in the UK. But it took me that long to get the right people. You got to get the right people on the bus. When you've got the right people on the bus, you've got to get them into the right seat. And if you haven't got the right people, get them off the bus. Put them somewhere where they'll add value, or if they need to leave, they need to leave. But get the right people on the bus, get the right people in the right seats. Treat them respectfully. Be demanding of them, but also be tolerant of them at the same time. Be patient, because, you know, it's an interesting concept. When somebody makes a mistake, and I remember, you know, looking at the guys and in my team, and when somebody makes a mistake, when they're operating normally, their energy level's here. When they make a mistake, automatically their energy level comes down.
Yeah.
Your job as a leader is so simple. You've got to find a way of getting their energy level back up. You're not going to do it by getting into a mindset of blame. So soon as you choose questions like, oh my God, what were you doing? What were you thinking? How much is it costing? You idiot. Their energy levels has already come down, and you just pushed them down further. So as a leader, the same as when you're leading people, the very pragmatic way, if you really want people to be at their best, is you ask a different set of questions. So, you know, when somebody would come to me and say, Roy, sorry, listen, this has gone wrong. I need to tell you. I would say, where are we? How are you, first of all? Are you okay? How do we fix it? What do you think you need to get it back on track? How long do you think? Is it recoverable completely? You create a different set of questions and finalize it with, and by the way, anything you need, I want you to also know, I trust you to get this done. And anything you need, I will be there.
That's great. But also I want to ask you a question. Okay, if we go even further
Yeah.
and say if somebody is their lowest position, maybe not even somebody made a mistake at corporate or work, but they're like on the street or they're really at a serious crisis of their life. What is your advice? What's one thing that they can do to get themselves out of this situation?
That's a fantastic question, because I can tell you, even going back to the days when I was homeless, or I remember I took this first operations manager's job when I was like 21 years old, and I mentioned to you before, which is very true. I kind of sat there, and the only thing going through my mind was, what idiot actually gave me this job? What fool gave me this job at 21 years old? And even homeless, I could be sitting on a wall looking at the stars thinking, crimey, where is all this going? My view on people who get to the lowest point is, first of all, as a person, as a leader, you've got to show people compassion, right? The worst thing when somebody gets to their lowest point is when people start talking about numbers, or they start talking about,
No,
elements.
but let's not put it from the leadership perspective. Let's put yourself in a situation of somebody's just at their low. Never mind the leader. We're talking somebody who's really rock bottom, and they're going through family crisis, or they're lost everything, or about to lose everything. And that moment is saying, "Do I go homeless? What do I do? Do I go to?" Mental health is at the verge of breaking. It's really serious crisis. Like
it is. I think some of it's also genetic, right?
Yeah.
In a sense of, certainly with me, right? And you could argue, okay, but Roy, you were homeless on the streets of London. You don't kind of get much lower than that. Well, you do, because you could be homeless, you could be into drugs, you could be into alcohol, you could be into. And
you lose your health.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have never been into any of this. So, I've never even tried to smoke a joint. I've never had drugs ever in my life. I'm probably crazy enough as it is. But I think, some of it's genetic. Some of it's really, you've got to be able to, inside yourself, really find a fire inside you that makes you focus on the next step, right? The whole journey never becomes visible. My whole journey never became visible. It's like I've always said to people, I'm comfortable walking in the dark, not knowing where I'm going or where the path is, because in life, the same in business, if something really dramatic, if you go to the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, go back to COVID, I remember managing the whole piece within COVID, and people kind of going, how do you know what to do? Well, it's simple. You make sure your people are okay. You keep communicating. You basically make yourself visible. You use Teams. I mean, the whole world discovered Teams and discovered Skype and all this stuff more than ever in COVID. So you have a look what's available, but you make sure you continue to communicate with people. But in terms of being at that lowest point, my view is, people have got to look to the next 1, 2, 3 steps. Even when I've managed some of the biggest contingencies, terrorist attacks and everything else, and when you haven't got the answers in front of you, you know the next 1, 2, 3 things you can do. And if you're in the dark and you can see your first 1, 2, 3 steps, you take those 1, 2, 3 steps. Because by the time you've taken your third step, the next 3 steps will become visible.
I see.
And then you take the next 3 steps, and the next 3 steps become visible. What you've got to do is, when you're in that position, you've really got to have some quality time to reflect. And when I was homeless, I had a lot of quality time to reflect, believe you me.
That's interesting.
And it was one of those things that I would sit and think, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do next? And the only thing that I ever wanted to do when I was homeless was find a job. The first element that was the catalyst for me to be able to get closer, further away from poverty, further away from the street, and closer to getting on a journey, was finding the job. So everything else then for me was academic, because all I actually did, this is why in business we also have priorities, right? So my first priority, homeless, find a job. I can't find a home without finding
So
a job. So I found a job. All my energy went into this. Then I created my next priority. So once I found a job, my next priority was find somewhere that I wasn't on the street, and I did. I was lucky enough to be able to rent a room at that time, which is what I did. And then I focused on the next step, which was learning more about the business and everything, which is why I did what I did. So it was about having achievable, focused steps. I wasn't thinking about 5 years down the line.
because that can become overwhelming on
Well,
its own, and that's what people get a lot of anxiety of what's going to be the future like. Whereas you were focusing on just the next
the
most
next 6
priority,
to 12 months.
next tangible. How much do you think, or of from your journey, and your success, you attribute to luck versus hard work?
I think it's a combination of both. I think sometimes who you are as a person when you engage with somebody, you either leave a lasting impression that's good or bad.
Yeah.
You sit and you're either likable or you're not likable. I remember somebody once describing a guy to me, which
Yeah.
is fascinating. And they said, "Do you know what? This guy's miserable all the time." And I kind of went, okay, but if you have a bad day and you only have one bad day, it means you have a bad day. But if you have a bad day every day, maybe you're not the best person in the world, right? Maybe you are just genuinely miserable. But, for me, the luck element,
I disagree. I think it's not the person, it's the mindset. So it's like the driver.
person and mindset. Okay,
So
yes, I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
In a sense of when I say the person, I mean the mindset.
Is the driver, not
Yeah.
not the body.
No, agree. And that's why I said, the fire's got to come from inside. The desire to do
So
what
change the driver. Say,
Yeah.
hey, who's driving me, my body today? Is it the miserable? Is it the
Yeah.
drunken driver? Or is it the one that I want?
But it's conscious driving,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
When you wake up in the morning, you don't consciously wake up, put your feet down, walk to the bathroom, brush your teeth. You do all that subconsciously. When you're talking about driving action in this sense, it's got to be conscious driving. You've got to do it and you've got to be focused and make sure you're doing it. In terms of hard work, I've always been hardworking.
Okay.
And the thing is this, I love work, right? I love leading people. I love managing a business. I love seeing things develop, growing revenue, growing profits, growing quality, all this kind of stuff. So for me, was meeting Tony hard work? No, that was luck. The mindset of the conversation that we had and the impression I left was he kind of said, I want to help this guy because I think he can do something. And this is what he told me afterwards. So this is feedback he gave me when he said, when we first met, he said, when you left my office, he said, I actually felt energized. I couldn't believe I'd spoken to somebody who was homeless, who was so positive.
It's very interesting. Just for the audience, and a couple of principles that I personally follow is every time I meet somebody, it's not always possible, but I ask myself two questions. What value did they add in during that conversation?
Yeah.
And how did I make them feel?
Yes.
And I think you've just really kind of been doing that naturally.
Yeah.
And to that point, if you look at someone today that is in a very difficult situation, really, maybe I had a chance to listen to this discussion, could they replicate your journey? Could someone really, what do you think?
I'm not sure. Yeah. I mean, no, but if I can do it, right? Some homeless dyslexic dude from Wales, if I can do it, you'd have to kind of go, well, anybody can do it so long as they apply the right mindset and they apply the right, leadership tools and equally, people have said to me, and I've said, sometimes I've been lucky to end up with the teams that I have. You attract the team that you attract because of you. And, whilst I've got a lot of humility and I as I say, I give a lot of the benefit of everything that we've done for my team. And I love my team. The reality is good people will attract good people. And if I was the leader that wasn't the feedback that I've had from my team, and certainly since leaving DHL 6 months ago, the feedback that I continuously get about my leadership, which is extremely positive, is why probably I was so successful, because I had great people in my team who, success will breed success, will breed success, the same as positivity will breed positivity. And negativity, it's easy to pull someone down. Pulling someone down is the easiest thing in the world. And it's one of the things that I really despise, when people actively pull people down. Picking people up is the hardest thing, because if people don't want to come up, they won't come up. They won't come up. If you don't want to pull people down, you'll end up pulling them down. So positive leadership is so important. But I think I have been lucky, but I do believe you make your own luck. If you've got a positive mindset, if you've got a positive aura, you've got an energy. You touched on this, right? When you said, the couple of questions you asked, one of them is, how did I make them feel? I've always said, when I've gone to any country to do a review on how that business is doing, with the European board, and we'd go through all business metrics from, the EBIT to the people, to the operation, to the customer service and everything else. I would always say my one target is every country that I visit, I wanted to leave there with them feeling more energized and happier. Because even if they're not performing well, and you can be respectful in telling people the performance needs to improve, if you can make people feel happy, energized, positive, even if they're not performing at the level that you want them, they'll be performing at a higher level than what they will if you're negative with them.
Yep.
So for me,
I agree with that.
Yeah, for me, even if we would go to a country and we would say, listen, they're not performing as well as we'd want them to be and everything else, the target was still the same. We would give them honest, respectful feedback about there needed to be improvements, and what areas, and what help. What can I do for you to help you, and everything else, right? But you get people feeling more positive and energized, they will produce better numbers. Now, maybe they're not good enough for what you want, and that's a longer term discussion about whether you make some leadership changes or everything else. But from a business perspective of continuous improvement, of performance +1 or performance +2, the reality is happier, energized people will perform better. So that was my big thing.
What about the failures? So have you ever felt giving up even after you started to succeed?
Never once.
That's interesting.
And if I go back to 2017, we moved our hub in Brussels in 2017 from the one side of the airport to the other. And I kind of talked to the guy who was in charge of this. And this is a facility that manages, 2,300 people. So it's a significant facility. And everything, when I did a quick visit and I had a discussion and everything was rosy, I ended up kind of then going on vacation. I think I ended up on vacation for one day when I got the phone call, which basically said, what you've been told isn't correct. And, the transition from one area to the next didn't go well at all. And as a result of which, I ended up promoting myself to the position of managing director of that hub, because I had been misled at the time. And I kind of didn't go home for 6 or 7 weeks. So, I mean, listen, there's this thing in terms of accountability. The buck has to stop with me. I'm accountable. You can't delegate accountability. I am accountable because it happens on my watch. So I went in and I ran that place for 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks without going home. Then I continued to run it and I positioned people and everything else. And you know what? I learned a lot from that going wrong. Now, luckily within the organization, I had done so many things over the years that, you know, these things don't become terminal. And I think within DHL, one of the things that as a business, why they're number one this year globally and regionally for great place to work, is because they do have a mentality of learning. They have a mentality of values and people first. And where you've got somebody, you know, take it as me at the time, at that point, had been with them for 20 years. One failure doesn't mean you're a failure. A failure is an opportunity to learn. Those people who don't do anything never fail. Those people who do stuff will fail. And I would prefer for somebody to do and try, and it wasn't a disastrous failure,
Yeah.
right? But it was one I take seriously because
Yeah.
I want to make sure for customers, the business, it's contained very quickly. But it wasn't what I call a
Okay.
huge element, but it was enough that you take it personally, accountable, and you lead from the front. You've got to be visible.
Thinking about your past, and
Mm.
how does your past really shape the way you treat your team?
Significantly.
Okay.
I've been blessed with different elements of, you know, I said earlier, I'm happy I was homeless. I'm happy I grew up poor. I'm happy I had to start working at 13 years old when I was burning steel and welding and changing wheels on big earth movers and everything else because we needed the money and we were poor. All of that gave me a sense of appreciation, humility. I value everything that either I've achieved or the people that I've come in contact with. I've made some great friends. I've learned some great stuff from some great people. So for me, when I have a look back and I think, you know, did it have a significant impact? Yes, it did, because it gives you the ability to walk in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
The one thing that level of humility and, you know, having to work extremely hard for everything you've got, it makes you value other people. It makes you value their contribution.